wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast, When the Fantasy of Motherhood Comes Crashing Down Around You, is spurred by some conversation that we've had in our aligned parenting course after an email that you'd sent out, Bridge, which we will, definitely lead with in this particular podcast. But before I do, I'd love to remind you to jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe. On that homepage, you'll just see click the button to join our tribe, and you fill in your name and email address, and once a week we send you a wrap-up with links to everything that we've podcast and blog and posted about, so you can choose what you would love to dive more deeply into. And then occasionally, as this letter actually spurs today's podcast, we send you what we call a love letter. So just a really touchy-feely conversation, an email, an awakening, a toolkit that you and I would generally have a discussion with each other about, that we figured these beautiful conscious listeners of ours would also be more interested in. So sign up to nourishingthemother.com.au to join our tribe.
So this week's topic, it's one that I think comes up again and again. We must have had 4 or 5 rounds now of our Leading to Loving program, and it's just such a classic pattern, I think, of the fantasy, beautiful, whimsical, idealistic view of motherhood that we might have when we're trying to conceive or when we're pregnant, and then the reality of those newborn days and months and that first year essentially can really just be earth-shattering. And I was so called back into this place recently when I was at a lunch and I saw a new mum whose baby was just 12 weeks. And gosh, in her, I just saw so much of myself at that stage with my son, and who I was then. I say in the email, she was, anxious. She was unable to listen to tears from her baby. She was feeling guilty. She was wanting to get things right, protective, judgmental of the world around who doesn't understand her or her baby. This precious, perfect, innocent baby is the perception. Exhaustion, overwhelm. But then I saw even more in her that I've seen in other women, and it was the resentment towards her baby, and the facing of that smashed fantasy of the cruisy motherhood, trusting every voice but her own, the sleep consultants who are making a mint, off the mother's desire to have control again and to fix things. And, I wanted to say to her, like this woman, I wanted to say, come join our tribe. It's the way, your baby's part of you and she's here to teach you. But it's not my place to say that this was not the kind of woman who was going to be open to that. So I just listened to her and I offered her, a little bit of guidance and perspective, and then I just let her go and had to trust that she'll find the right way for her and her baby. But it just pulled me straight back into that place.
I bet. What did the guidance and, perspective that you gave her ever so gently, what did that look like?
A lot of it was just sort of bits and pieces like, your daughter's helping you to grow in this, and it can be so easy to go into the guilt of the things that we've done or not done, but it's a dance, it's a relationship, and all relationships are a dance. And even though there's an enormous responsibility that comes with motherhood, you're still both learning from each other, and she's teaching you as much as you're teaching her. And just to go gently on yourself, but I didn't go much more than that. It was just to really try to hold that space of where she was at, and also just talk anecdotally about this idea, that so many women who have this rose-coloured view of motherhood or think that the baby's going to slot into your life. So often the reality does not match that fantasy at all, and there's a lot of cases of P&D, that fit that profile, where you've got perhaps it's been a long fertility journey to falling pregnant, or
just a lifelong dream.
Yeah, or also the mother who incredibly identifies herself with her career and has a strong identity with who she is in the professional capacity, and then goes into motherhood and is like, hang on a sec, who am I now? And the spiral into a depression as a result of the letting go of a sense of self that was so a part of who they perceived they were, and now they've kind of got to rebuild the self in this motherhood journey. You know, it's motherhood. I think it's like any life stage. You've kind of got to find yourself again, and I don't think that we have enough conversations around this as a culture at all. And so I think a lot of mothers end up kind of trying to, you know, gasp for air and perhaps getting advice from people who maybe aren't the best people to give them advice, and perhaps doctors GPs who maybe look at things on a surface level but don't kind of understand the broader dynamic at play for that particular woman and her story and her family around her and her relationship dynamic that are all feeding into what she's bringing to the motherhood path now. So I really wanted to unpack that a bit because I think it's massive.
I'd love to maybe start before we kind of get into the unpacking and the discussions that were kind of happening in our group. I'd love to start with just the universal concept of this. So we've titled this, you know, the fantasy of motherhood. And I know, Bridge, that you talk a lot about when we build a fantasy, we're also unconscious to the fact that we're breeding a nightmare of equal intensity. So no different to infatuation.
Yeah,
you know,
breeding
deeply,
resentment.
You know, in love builds resentment. It's these two sides of the one coin, and the more you're polarized or only seeing it one way, the more that other way is going to hit you in the face to get you to rebalance those perceptions. And, you know, I think probably second to none is motherhood that does this. Relationships maybe next, but certainly motherhood. And you know, I just really love to start there, maybe with that, just that concept, and then
yes, this is a concept of so there's a whole bunch of we know we have moral laws like in the world, like, you know, if people break moral laws all the time, like, you know, speeding and whatever else, but there's beyond that, there's laws that govern the universe as natural laws, and one of those is this concept of you know, of the two sides to everything, and that those two sides are ever present all the time, but we often only perceive one. And our psyche always has both, and our psyche is often just like our body's trying to work to get back to homeostasis. Our psyche is always trying to work to get back to equanimity, which is like kind of this evenness. So the more elated we can get, the more there's like we're hiding a depression, and that's why we see comedians often have this crazy kind of like hyper happiness hiding this incredible depression underneath, because it's like the
counterbalancing pole.
It's
almost,
like the poles need each other to exist. And so the same thing, if you're building this incredible one-sided fantasy world or fantasy ideal, what you're not seeing is the other side of that, which is this deep nightmare that's like kind of seeking to be revealed if you don't naturally equilibrate yourself, you know, through kind of looking at, you know, perhaps drawbacks to what you think motherhood's going to be like, or, you know, the challenges to the things that you think are going to be perfect. If you're not able to actively do that yourself, then often the scenario in which you're faced with in motherhood will do that for you. You know, the baby that's super challenging, the relationship that goes on the rocks, the lack of support perhaps, the unhelpful caregivers or, you know, health professionals, that the universe will act through these different people and mechanisms to bring you back into that equanimity, but often through taking you to the nightmare first of all, if you can't do it yourself. And I think it's, you know, we're surrounded by this idea of motherhood and culturally of it being so beautiful and like connecting and profound, and it is, it's all those things, but it's all these other stuff, it's all this other stuff too. And if we don't allow ourselves to see the full breadth and depth of it, and sometimes we're going to really have to go there to appreciate it.
And that's kind of the point, isn't it, of that breeding nightmare, is just to get you to go through the hard stuff, to go almost like that breaking that remakes you, isn't it? That kind of, oh, you know, I judged this and now I don't.
Yeah.
And I thought this was the only right way and now I realise there's more than that.
Yes.
It's just this kind of balancing of opening up this sort of grey area as opposed to something being black or white.
And it's, you know, to the extent to which you're polarised is to the extent to which, and, you know, therefore the extent to which you're polarised is the extent to which you're one-sided. So again, fantasy is the extent to which you've then got the potential for integrating later. So
you explain that a bit more.
So if you imagine that, like, I kind of like to think of it like a complete exploding apart of like atoms, and they just go as far apart as you can imagine because they're just so out there. And in order for them to come back together, and for you to become whole again, you have to integrate those pieces, but they're only going to become integrated once you have to face your stuff, once you have to look at the story that got them out there to begin with. so that you can build them back together and whole again. And I look at, perhaps yours and my journey too, in terms of the incredible polarization that we began our mothering journeys with, in terms of this really strong attachment focus. And
I would like to cast our minds back there.
Yeah, because I mean, you and I touch on certain things.
I feel so far from it now that sometimes I have trouble remembering.
So do I. And, and I think also that, the way in which you perceive the whole world, like, a classic case that, when, you're polarized is if you see, like, that you need to be shielded from the world around you, or that your baby needs to be protected from this scary outside world.
I definitely had that.
Yeah, so did I. Or that, that everybody around you isn't right, and you're the one who's doing the things that are right.
I had that too.
Yeah. So, so these are all feedback, right? So that's all the feedback in the world around you, showing you that you're polarized. It's not bad or wrong, but ultimately you will need to become integrated again to the extent to which you become polarized. However, there's an enormous amount of wisdom that comes from the integration piece, because you've had to travel this kind of like, heron's journey, of self, to be able to then put the pieces back together again. You have to experience all of that pain and wrestling with the self and wrestling with the relationships of others and your belief systems and your self-righteousness.
Self-righteousness and pride.
Yeah,
ouch.
you have to wrestle with that stuff, and that is how you
that's
evolve.
Always bitten me.
Yeah, I think bites all of us, right? Like,
yeah. But when I think about it, that's what it is, right? Because I was so sure that if you weren't organic, that, you were going to get cancer.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what else. If my child played with anything that wasn't wooden and open-ended, that I would be destroying their imagination.
Not fostering their creativity.
Yeah. And to the point where, I was really like, oh my God, even the air we're breathing is poisoning my child.
Yeah. I can remember, like, even before I had my son, and I was driving to visit my friend who just had a baby, and I was like depressed for the world he was being born into. I don't know where my head was at then, but it was clearly not appreciating the depth and breadth of the world, and the beauty of the world. It was me looking through my very filtered value system and belief system and self-righteous value system and belief system to see
where is this world going.
Yeah, really not appreciating the light and the dark and how they both needed, because it was pre that whole journey, because I hadn't been called into that space yet. To look at how to integrate,
Yeah. So when you think about your motherhood, did you build a fantasy? Like, even with still, I mean, I know first time is perhaps different, and you certainly had a really conscious first time. Like you were even saying you were really conscious of reading parenting.
Yeah.
See, I didn't even get that far. I kind of got conscious to the birth and then nothing beyond that.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and then I wonder second time, because you had the infertility journey with Sylvie, was there still a fantasy there with that, or not really?
I don't really feel like there was.
No,
and I think with Sylvie, the difference is with Hugo, like I was in a career that was paying great, but I wasn't really personally fulfilled. Like I was looking for motherhood to be where I found myself. Like, I was almost relying on motherhood to be where I found myself, because I hadn't found myself professionally really in a space that felt like it called and awakened my soul. Whereas with Sylvie, like, I've been on the path for several years now of really doing a deeply aligned work in the world, and really stuff that lights me up. So I wasn't looking to her or to pregnancy or to birth or to parenting to be that for me. Like, they're still deep values of mine, but they're not values that I have to hold on to for dear life and identify myself with in such a way that I have to kind of shout from the rooftops, this is the right way, which is where I was at with Hugo.
Where do you think we get that from, this is the right way, that self-righteousness?
I think it comes when we perceive that we could lose something. That self-righteousness comes because we've got so much resting on,
so much invested in it.
Like if you don't have anything
identity
else,
and belief systems.
Yeah, but that's your thing. Like, you want that to be right. It's the same thing. Like, you see it happening with the clash in different health paradigms, and how much doctors don't want to accept certain things, because to accept that would undermine everything that they know and have been educated. Same thing that natural health practitioners who are threatening to have their licenses suspended are incredibly protective of what they know, because of the threat to take all of that away. I think it's the same for us when we're looking at invest everything into one particular thing, and we feel like the world around us is challenging that. I think it's almost like that animal nature within us that wants to say that this is right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's our angelic nature, it's our higher mind that needs to come on board to be able to see things from a broader perspective, to appreciate the world around you and the values of the people around you, and see how they serve you, but at the same time still say we're deeply authentic in your own values. And I think you can really do that. And I think that's where you and I found ourselves now, having had to travel that incredible polarization and then come to the point of going, yep, I see that, kids who aren't consciously parented turn out fine, but I still really want to value that. It's still really important to me to listen to them, to, really see what's going on underneath their behaviour.
But it's not a pain point.
But it's not a pain point now. It comes from a place of inspiration as opposed to deep pain, which I think is where initially it probably came from.
And that pain can come in the form of emotional pain or protection or defensiveness or reactiveness to those people around us that are challenging those choices, and particularly with our young babies. Like if we're co-sleeping and feeding and wearing and there's a lot of judgment and you're feeling really stingy about defending that, that's really what we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, and you'll know this, if you're hearing certain voices in your head that maybe aren't your own, that want to kind of say to someone that's not the right way, or it's really important to do it this way, or I don't like it the way that you do this to my child. That kind of thing, it's really important to kind of check in with where's that coming from. Where are those beliefs coming from? If it is intuitive and really inspired and comes from a place of groundedness and congruence with what you're believing, then awesome. But if it's coming from
it wouldn't bother you if people were saying that. Because they wouldn't be saying it. People wouldn't need to reflect it to you.
Because you're not having to face it, because there's alignment there, therefore you're not calling in the challenge.
So if you're listening to this podcast and some of these concepts are just running a little bit over your head, then I would love to invite you to jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au/products, and you will see a button there to find out more about. We have about 12 products sitting there that are super cheap for you to download, between, I think it's about $5 and $30, various products that are just simply PDFs downloadable straight away with toolkits, information on consciously questioning your child's behaviour, your family dynamics, through to money blocks and relationship dynamic podcasts, birth, how to flip your birth. There's a whole heap of products we'd love you to check out at nourishingthemother.com.au/products. And we'd love to remind you that we have Loathing to Loving as an online program that is always live and sitting there for you to chew through the content on.
Yeah, and this is really all about reinvigorating, perhaps the numbness that you find yourself in motherhood. It's really flipping the rut. It is connecting yourself with yourself and owning and celebrating all of who you are, the light and the dark, and really kind of knowing how to rock that self that is waiting there to be awakened. So you're moving through 5 weeks of content just with us, and during our live rounds we've got the live webinars and our members only Facebook group. There's workbooks and specific toolkits for you to use in your own life, and it really is a new paradigm for viewing yourself and yourself in this world, and it's been profound for everyone who's done it. We've got over 60 women who've done that course with us now, and so many jump in again and again whenever we run the live rounds. So we really invite you to dive in whenever feels right for you, and self-pace, so that then whenever you're ready you can jump in a live round with us, and really,
as many live rounds as you like.
Yeah, exactly, because there's lifetime access.
That's right. You've got to remember, nourish the mother to rock your family. So jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au to find out more.
I think one of the other real nightmares that so many mothers find themselves living is that kind of wrestle with their desire for control, and that particularly if you have really wanted to be or prided yourself as a woman in terms of being organised and controlling of the life that you live, you introduce a child into that or multiple children into that, and it can really deeply challenge those values and deeply kind of rock you.
I think it does for nearly every woman, because regardless of how organised or disorganised you consider yourself as a person, we all have areas of organisation and disorganisation. And the ability to control ourselves and our time and how we function in the world, what we choose to enter or not enter, escape out of or move into, that's still control. Whereas when you have a baby, you lose that ability to exit.
I think that incredible responsibility of the 24-hour parenting thing is all-consuming. I think even perhaps even that knowledge for some women can be overwhelming.
Or just getting shit done.
Yeah.
Like just the whole thing of being on someone else's timeline.
And, you know, the naps that don't work out, right?
Yeah.
And you have all this stuff you want to get done in a nap. Or, you know, the good night's sleep that you're wishing for and it doesn't happen. And you potentially, with wherever your mindset is with that, it can really send you into a downward spiral.
Yeah. And the validation, perhaps you're a person who really, well, I certainly am, who, you know, sense of worth is often based on what you achieve.
Yeah.
Or your, you know, the validation is your productivity. And if all of a sudden you're in a state where you can't reach your productivity goals, or, you know, you can't be validated for something that doesn't have a scorecard, it's, you know, it can be really crushing to ego and identity.
Yeah, and I think too, if you really look to the outer world for that validation, it can be earth-shattering. But what I do love, because I always love to look for the flip, is how much we then are called to validate ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
To give ourselves what we're seeking from others.
To shine that light back in.
Yeah, because even when I notice that I don't know about you, but I notice when I'm finding that I'm kind of wiped that many bottoms, or I've served that many meals, or I've wiped the bench that many times in a day, I really try to think about the service in that and the fulfillment in that, as opposed to kind of resenting the full-onness of that, and then kind of, because we can so easily go that I got nothing done or this or that, but even the way in which we bring ourselves to those tasks, and the way in which we choose to value ourselves in those perhaps, you know, seemingly mundane tasks, if we are willing to choose to see ourselves as fulfilled and okay even in those things, it totally changes how we show up. I mean, I know that for myself.
Oh gosh, I need that reminder.
Do you?
Yeah. It makes sense when you say it. I'm like, oh God, yeah, of course. But no, I have to say I don't think it's a natural functioning for me. That would be an awareness state that I would have to bring.
But it's funny though, because I think that you serve, like, you know, beautiful food for your family in a way that's.
I enjoy that, but if I feel like I'm run off my feet and I'm sick of wiping the bench, I'm not flipping that into service at this point in time. I'm going, ugh.
Another thing.
I've had enough of this.
I think it's just one of those things to bring the awareness to, right? Like, because we know how much it's not the outer world that you know is controlling us. It's how we're choosing to respond to the outer world. And so I think that bringing awareness to our inner dialogue around what's going on for us and why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, and how we can choose to bring something different to the next moment that we're called into is enormously powerful.
Gosh, I love this. What I mean by I love it is just, I think this is just timely. You know, when we always do these podcasts and one of us goes, gosh, I needed that reminder. Or, gee, that was perfect timing.
It's like when we listen to them, we're like, man, I was really talking to myself that day, wasn't I?
This is it. And I just think, you know, what grace that brings to motherhood, and we can actually use validation in terms of the service that's providing, and flip it further out into the relationship. If relationship is high on your values, is, you know, what is that bringing in benefits to those people and therefore back to you and into your family? Like, that's just a beautiful awareness practice.
And I always think it's really, even the way that we are with ourselves and how that becomes
the gentleness or the respect.
And I know how much that becomes the blueprint for our children around what they see mothers as, or how they relate to themselves sometimes. And so that's when I remind myself, even if I'm having one of those days where I don't feel like I'm very worthy in the world because of what I'm choosing to dedicate my time to, I think, no, like, this is creating ripple effects that I can't even measure right now.
That's exactly.
You know, and so why I am careful with the words I choose to use with my children, or the conversations that we might have, and the way that I help them reframe things. You know, that stuff matters. It's like every relationship, you know, what we give out, we really can receive, and also we serve the world with what we give out through the relationships that we build with our children and with those we love, because we give them, you know, the dialogue and the framework with which to engage in their world.
All right, Ridge, so this podcast, we've kind of gone in a bit loopy circles around philosophy and theory and story, and you and I, you know, love something a bit more tangible to actually be able to apply in you know, our listeners' lives more specifically. So let's maybe talk about strategy around this. You've built, or you recognise there's something in this podcast that's speaking to you, that fantasy that's brought down that crushing experience of your life, your sense of self, your identity, your relationship, the resentment. We didn't really touch on that, the resentment that breeds with your child, that we often, that's something we don't really talk about in motherhood.
Yeah, we
Maybe
don't.
we'll just quickly talk about that, and then we'll come to, common factors or denominators. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the resentment thing is a really interesting one, and I think that the more discomfort we have around owning resentment that we have towards our children, which is quite normal to feel resentful or feel like your buttons pushed by a child, but
anger,
the more that we're uncomfortable with feeling and voicing that, the more it's likely repressed for us, and the more our unconscious mind is kind of having a field day with that, and it often comes out in other ways, like it flicks off in other ways that are less productive and potentially more damaging, because we're unable to own and integrate and make okay those feelings. So, because it's one thing, we're entitled to have the full spectrum of human feeling. That's what we are here to experience. If we didn't need those feelings, they wouldn't be there. The difference is how we learn to manage them and how we learn to act or not act on them. I think I said to this woman who we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, I think so often so many mothers are 3 steps away from psychosis, and how much you're able to maintain your wellness in mind is by how well you're able to integrate and accept that full spectrum of feeling.
The places it takes you to.
Yeah, even the stuff that you can find really hard to own, and the stuff that's painful, and the stuff that you think that you shouldn't feel. If you've got judgments around some of those feelings, and that's telling you that there's belief systems that are perhaps your own deep inner child wounding that is making those feelings not okay, which means you're going to keep running into them. You're going to keep having those same kinds of scenarios play out until you begin to integrate them and make them okay.
Absolutely, which actually is our first strategy, is when you're feeling this, real, like we talked about before, that real sense of needing to be defensive around a particular belief, of something being the right way or the only way or the way you should do it or the way it should be done. That sense of clinging on so tightly to that there's a sense of identity, and if it got swept out from underneath you, that you would have to completely rebuild your sense of self, the belief systems that have got you to where you are in your life now. That whole carpet swept out from underneath you thing.
It's almost like an addiction, right? Like it's almost like we
get addicted to our own beliefs, don't we?
We do.
Perceptions.
And that's because we actually have neurotransmitters that kind of fire on when we have our beliefs reaffirmed and we have our beliefs supported, which we...
And that dopamine hit.
Yeah, that dopamine hit. And so, of course, we're going to sometimes react like that fiery, like...
Leave it alone. I need it.
Yeah. And so just starting to understand that within ourselves is enormously powerful.
And so the tighter you're clinging onto something, in actual fact, the ability to actually dive into why you need to hold on to that so tightly, where that's come from, and the ability to actually, equilibrate and release and bring a sense of, just reduced emotional reactivity to it, the calmer that whole experience is, and you don't need to cling so tightly. You can still do that thing, but it comes from a sense of authenticity rather than a need to be defensive or reactive.
Yeah, it's powerful. The other big one really is kind of as a feedback to know that you're really in this place is the subordination to others. So the opinions and voices of others in your head, whether that's through, the book says this or my mother did this and that's the right way. That's another really good insight into which, and try to unpack, why is that, and why do I believe that, and what makes that person know more than me, and why am I having a difficult time trusting myself in this? What am I not making okay about myself that means I can't believe that I have everything that I need to bring to this situation?
Before I met you, I'd never heard the word subordinations.
Powerful. We all run them, and they can really serve us. But our most powerful ones are laid down in childhood. Our most powerful ones are to our parents and to school teachers or other kinds of leaders. So particularly if you're in a church or a religious doctrine, they become really powerful, and you internalize them, and they're often the ones that you don't question. So it's like they're subordinations you might not even believe you have any, but you just view the world in a certain way. That's often subordinated to an ideology or a person or a belief system. And that's also why you can't even see the world outside your paradigm of thinking.
Why do we subordinate? Like, because we're always subordinating.
We are. Oh, yeah.
Right? Kind of like control patterns. We've always got them.
Yeah, we've always kind of got them, but some can be more insidious than others, I think. And they often, they're the most powerful things that keep us in our perception of safe. And they're the reason why a lot of people don't kind of really expand and show up in the full capacity that the human potential has in the world, because most of us think that we need to go and study for however long many years to be okay in the world, to have enough knowledge to be able to serve the world, and then we have to go and work in a job and then wait until we get a promotion, and then we follow a track because that's what we're told that we do. But that's only a subordination to a system, and that's been set out for maybe 50 to 100 years. It's not actually that's a very, very narrow way to view our
evolution
path in life, right? But most people don't question it, and that shows the level of entrenchment of certain kinds of subordinations, because you subordinate to societal values, cultural values, parental values, religious values, and unless you start to question why do I believe that, you'll unquestionably follow that path. Yeah. And the last one really is looking at the benefits of the way that you don't want to go. So
this is a big one in our group. We're always just pushing those edges with the beautiful members in our group. And if you're listening, much love to you.
Because this is the idea that, maximum growth for us occurs at the border of support and challenge, which means really taking our brain and ourselves to that dance where we are forced to reflect on ourselves, reflect on our beliefs, to not so much stay in comfort, but rather step out a little bit and be willing to look at ourselves in a more critical way that really recognises that I'm whole with or without that particular belief, or with or without this particular thing that I am so attached to. And you and I have done an enormous amount of work around this, around birth, for example. So we both have strong values around natural, undisturbed birth, but both of us really had to dance and face the other side of that. So the benefits of intervention, the benefits of all the things that we don't value or find difficult to accept, and to see how actually, when you stack them together, you're going to get just as many benefits as drawbacks to both scenario when you consider the ripple effects and consider all of the other factors involved in those outcomes. And the same goes with so many things that we believe might be wrong or bad, and the more that we can expand our understanding of things being okay or acceptable even when they don't go the way we want them to, we are able to integrate more of the world around us and find greater alignment and connection with people even with different values to us, because we can see that they're not bad or wrong, and yes, they might be different to us, but they show love and through their set of values, and that's no more right or wrong than ours. And that's really the key piece of wrapping up those top, I suppose, 3 strategies to really employ when you're looking at where you find yourself on this path in motherhood that might be, facing the nightmare.
Yeah. Which surely we all do at some point.
Oh my God, yes. And I don't think that you're growing as a mother or a person if you're not getting to those edges and not kind of having to, go, look at yourself and look at what your beliefs were leading into it, and looking at what you're attaching to, and really kind of having that introspection and challenge within yourself.
Yeah. So please, look more deeply into any of our content to understand some deeper concepts that we've kind of flashed on today. So you can go back to previous podcasts relating to family dynamics, to inner child work, blog posts on nourishingthemother.com.au. We're on Facebook and Instagram as nourishingthemother.com, to just Nourishing the Mother on those, isn't it? And to connect with you, Bridget,
at suburbansandcastles.com, and you, Jules,
is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And remember, you need to nourish the mother to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.